Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Katie from Little House Learning Co. And today I want to talk with you about kindergarten standards and assessments. I find this topic incredibly interesting, especially as a kindergarten curriculum developer myself. I want to take you through what my state standards are in 2025 versus what kindergarten assessments were in 1995 when I was in kindergarten, and compare that to what Charlotte Mason envisioned for this age group of 5 to 6 year olds. What started me on this journey was finding this blue little folder in my parents' house as they were sorting through all of their papers. Not only does it have adorable pictures of me from kindergarten to 4th grade, but it has all of my tests and assessments from elementary school, middle school, up through my ACTs and things from high school. What I found most fascinating was the assessments that they had for me finishing kindergarten to see if I was ready for 1st grade, essentially the benchmarks that they're checking to make sure I've learned everything I need to learn in kindergarten. I think when we as parents send our kids off to school, a lot of times we just assume is similar to what we experienced. We think kindergarten is just kindergarten after all, right? How different could it be? But when I printed off my 2025 assessments for that kindergarten age group for Minnesota and compared them to my 1995 assessments, I was really surprised to find some startling differences. One of the main things I noticed in comparing my 2025 standards to my 1994-1995 standards is that there are significantly more standards. There are a lot of standards for social studies and history and art and music and mathematics and language arts. My 1995, at least what I had access to, is primarily just reading, writing, and a little bit of math. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be talking about what I have to compare. For example, writing standards in 2025 are significantly longer. A child has to be able to compose opinion pieces, informative text, explanatory text. They need to be able to take information about a specific topic and link events and show some of the beginning understanding and writing of a research paper. They need to be able to use and understand digital tools. Now, in 1994, 1995, all that a child needed to do to meet the writing standards was to print legibly. There are some things that are actually pretty similar, especially around the concepts of print. So a child being able to identify, the title page, the cover, the back cover of a book, or being able to answer questions about key details in a text that was read to them. In 1994 and 1995, a child needed to recognize alphabet letters, all of the upper and lowercase letters. In 2025, they also need to do that, but in addition, they need to be able to understand concepts like syllables, rhyming, beginnings of grammar. They need to be able to also print their uppercase and lowercase letters. For example, in my state assessment under Code 1011, it says that a child must demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English grammar and usage when writing or speaking. Print many upper and lowercase letters, use frequently occurring nouns and verbs, form regular plural nouns orally by adding s or es, understand and use question words, who, what, where, when, why, and how, use the most frequent occurring prepositions, to, from, in, out, etc., produce and expand complete sentences and shared language activities. So they have to demonstrate the command of the conventions of standard English grammar and usage when writing or speaking. Pretty different than just being able to recognize all of the upper and lowercase letters. My 1994-1995 assessment was making sure that I could read certain sight words, but they were significantly different than the 2025 standards. They are words like the, of, to, you, my, she, is. The 1995 words are things like going, mother, father, family, apple, puppy. You can see the difference. Also, in 2025, kids need to understand basics of phonics and decoding. They need to be able to read what they consider emergent reader texts and decode CVC words. And then there are things in the 2025 assessment that don't even have a correlation to my 1994-1995 assessment. Things like speaking, language, understanding informational texts. For example, a child needs to be able to, they say, participate in collaborative conversations with diverse partners about kindergarten topics and texts with peers and adults in small and larger groups. They need to follow agreed upon rules for discussion, like listening to others, taking turns speaking about the topics and texts under discussion. They need to continue a conversation through multiple exchanges, listen to others, and name emotions by observing facial expressions and other nonverbal cues, and follow basic oral directions. I mean, that is not anywhere near to anything that's on my 1994 or 1995 assessment. As a parent, I think it's really important to reflect on our state assessments and to ask yourself, where do these benchmarks even come from? Obviously, it's funding, it's boards and committees who are making this into law. For example, in my state, under art, a child needs to identify the characteristics of dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts from a variety of cultures, including the contributions of Minnesota American Indian tribes and communities. And you ask yourself, why are these the benchmarks? Are these making our kids into better people? Maybe, but maybe not. All of these benchmarks, it's important to ask, are these benchmarks making our children more eager to learn? Are they infusing a love of learning and making them lifelong learners? Are they taking into considerations of each child's unique personhood? It's also important to recognize that not every country is the same, obviously not even every state is the same, and that these benchmarks are always changing. Even looking at when I was in kindergarten versus now, what a kindergartner would experience, that's not really that long, but it is significantly different. What I find most interesting is that when they make changes all the time, they are adding things. They're hardly ever taking away anything. And even a lot of the things that they have for kindergarten could be learned through exposure, not testing, worksheets, and memorization and repetition. For example, in science, they're asked to observe a natural ecosystem or its model and identify living and non-living components in that system. They need to monitor daily and seasonal changes in weather and summarize the changes. Obviously, that's something that in a Charlotte Mason education, your child is spending lots of time out in nature and will just happen naturally. It's not something that they need to be assessed on. Now I want to take you through A Quiet Growing Kindergarten, which is my kindergarten curriculum, and I want to talk to you about Charlotte Mason's list of attainments for ages 5 and 6. She wrote this list as attainments. These are goals, they are not benchmarks, they are not standards, they're just things that kind of outline what she envisioned for this age group. She wrote this in a Parents Review article, and this is what I have based my entire Quiet Growing Kindergarten curriculum around. Let me compare that to our 2025 standards. For example, she talks about, number 1, to recite beautifully 6 easy poems and hymns. Well, they talk about poetry in 2025 standards, but they just talk about being able to identify it. I think there's a huge difference in a child being able to identify poetry versus being able to recite poetry. There is a personal possession of the information and a richness and a joy and an enjoyment of poetry rather than the analytical part of just being able to identify it. Also, in a Charlotte Mason education, there are a lot of faith-based attainments. There is scripture readings, there are psalms, there's parables, there's hymns, there's Bible history, and that's a huge part of what I value in an education that children miss out on, obviously, in a public school system. Her third attainment is to add and subtract numbers up to 10 with dominoes or counters, which is very different than the 2025 standards, which involved pattern recognition, numbers up to 31, which is also different than 1994, which is only numbers up to 20. They talk about backwards counting, more or less, numerical ordering, decomposing numbers, so being able to split in 3 and 4, that adds to number 7. They talk about 2 and 3 dimensional shapes, length, size, weight, position, measuring, etc. Very different. She also talks about in number 4, to read. What and how much will depend on what we are told of the child. And I think that that is so valuable that she is putting in her attainments the personhood of each individual child. In attainment number 5, she says to copy and print hand from a book. So not even that they can do upper and lowercase letters specifically from their own mind, but that they can just do copy work from a book. Then there are a ton more attainments about the natural world, describing boundaries and rivers and lakes and ponds, the ecosystems, to be able to describe 3 walks and 3 views from their home, to know points of a compass and wildflowers and leaves and birds. All of this is pretty much missing from the 2025 assessments. When it comes to history, or in 2025 they call it social studies, Charlotte Mason's list of attainments talks about being able to have a child tell 3 stories from history. That's 3 stories from Bible history, 3 stories from their early English history, because she's English. In A Quiet Growing Kindergarten, we say early American history, and then from Roman history, we say early Native American history. What I think is interesting about that is comparing that to social studies and history in 2025 assessments, where they talk about being able to compare and contrast your traditions in your family with those of other diverse families or those with diverse backgrounds. They don't really talk about a lot of history. It's more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. when you're talking about personal possession of information. For a child to be able to retell stories from history, they have to really know it in order to tell it. When we look at the state assessments for 2025, a lot of the things that they're talking about are being able to identify. So like historians generally construct chronological narratives to characterize eras and explain past events that change over time. So it's more about identifying things than being able to retell things. It's being able to identify artifacts as being from history. It says the civic identity of the United States is shaped by historical figures, places, and events, and by key foundational documents and other symbolically important artifacts. So again, it's about identifying more so than being able to retell and actually know history. Other things I would compare would be Charlotte Mason's emphasis on handiwork. So in 14, she says to send in certain kindergarten or other handiwork as directed. And these are different than crafts because they are things that a child is making that are actually foundationally building skills versus, cutting and pasting. And that I would compare to the 25 standards where they're talking about dance and media arts and theater. Also, she talks about stories, to tell 3 stories about their own pets, a rabbit, dog, or cat. And that would be in comparison to a child in 2025 where they need to describe familiar places, things, and events with prompting and support, providing additional detail, along with a lot of their other benchmarks for speaking, viewing, listening, and media literacy. There were no foreign language benchmarks I could find in my state's 2025 assessment, where she talks a lot about foreign language to name 20 common objects in French and to say a dozen little sentences. She also talks about to be able to sing 1 hymn, 1 French song, and 1 English song, or American folk song is what we do with the Quiet Growing Kindergarten. Folk songs are, rooted in history. They're so much a part of our culture versus just general music in 2025 assessments where a lot of the benchmarks that are more closely related are identifying the characteristics of music from a variety of cultures, including the contributions of Minnesota American Indian tribes and communities. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that interesting. I think it's always good for us to ask the question of why are my children being taught this information? Is this making them a better person? Is this making them into a lifelong learner? Is this really best for my child? Is this what I want for my child? Just thinking through and reflecting on those kinds of questions. If you are someone who is looking for a Charlotte Mason kindergarten for your child, please check out A Quiet Growing Kindergarten. I take all of her list of attainments and I put it into a very simple and easy to use weekly grid, as well as give you lots of information in the teacher's guide on how to teach each subject from a Charlotte Mason perspective. You can find it in my shop at littlehousellearningco.com. You can find me on Instagram as well at littlehouselearningco. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.